hello, welcome to sentence 14, the past participle start. And it's a tricky one. This is one of the most difficult ones to get right. So here's an example. Covered with the darkness of the forest itself, the bear seemed to carry the weight of the trees on its back. Lovely, complex sentence with a really interesting metaphor inside it. Now you can see there, I've put the fact that the past participle start normally indicates, not always, normally indicates that the word that you need to start the sentence with will end with the suffix, the verb suffix ed, ed. That's because most past participles are ed endings, but not all, as we shall see. So let's look at another example, this one from the King James Bible module where this is first introduced. Here we are, same sort of structure. Filled with the Spirit of the Lord, David walked confidently towards Goliath. There we are. So we can see. Now, one of the things that you might not notice here, unless it's pointed out, is the importance of with. The with is actually doing a lot of work. Covered with, filled with. Those constructions work quite well for a past participle start sentence. So that's something that I would really point out to students. So if you have a covered with subordinate clause, that will you complete that clause, put in the comma, and then write an independent clause. You can see that that works for both of those. Filled with the darkness of the forest itself, hanging, needs to be finished, subordinate. The bear seemed to carry the weight of the trees on its back, independent main clause. Filled with the Spirit of the Lord, comma, pivot, David walked confidently towards Goliath. So you can kind of hear and feel the change in tone. This, then that, with a comma pivoting between the clauses. Doesn't always have to work like that. There are some exceptions. Now here's one that's worth pointing out. So here's a clause where we don't have an ed word because bound, it's not binded, it's bound. So because that's an irregular past participle, there are always going to be some exceptions to the ed rule. And you can see there as well, we haven't got with. This time I've got a different preposition. So it's not the with that's doing the work, it's the preposition that's doing the work. So past participle plus preposition into the subordinate clause, comma, main clause. And if you have that construction, things will go well. You can also do some other things. But before we get there, let's have a think about what goes wrong. So let's have a look at this. You can imagine a student writing this. I've certainly seen students write similar things to this. Bellowed, the voice of God terrified Noah. What? Well, it looks like it's a past participle start, but what's the bellow doing? It's just a random verb on its own. It's not doing any work. Now that's kind of confusing because there are times when it does work. Terrified, Noah heard the bellowing voice of God. So why does the second one of these work and the first one not work? Well, it's to do with the relationship between the subject and the verb. So in the first sentence, the subject is the voice of God. And in the second subject, second sentence, Noah is the voice of God. So if we go to the first sentence, what we'd need to be able to do is to say the voice of God was bellowed, which we can't. We could say the voice of God was bellowing, and that would allow us to do a present participle start, but the past participle start is trickier. So why does the second one work? Well, it's because we could say Noah was terrified. So instead of saying Noah was terrified, I can say terrified, comma, subordinate clause, Noah heard the bellowing voice of God. And that works. So there, what's happening is that the was is actually doing the work. Even though it's not there, there's a missing was in that initial subordinate clause, which it couldn't be one for the first example with bellowed. And then we have if you look at a sentence like this, so if you got this, Samson strained as he heaved the pillars of the temple apart, we could think, right, okay, so surely we could put either strained or heaved in front of as the initial subordinate clause to make a past participle start sentence, but it doesn't work. You can't say Samson was heaved or Samson was strained. You could say Samson was strained, but in this case it wouldn't make sense because it means something slightly different. So you could say strained, comma, Samson decided he was a bit stressed or something like that. That's not very good. But because we're talking about him straining and pulling against his chains, it doesn't actually work. To make it work, we need to have a think about what's actually happening here. So if we had a sentence that was along the lines of Samson was tied to the pillars of the temple, we could then make tied to the pillars of the temple, Samson flexed and strained his huge muscles, and then it was worked. So we almost need a missing was, if we're going to have a one word or a second word sentence, or we need to have a preposition. Either one will work, but it's complicated. So these are the things that you need to be pointing out to students when you teach the past participle start. They will make lots of mistakes. You need to be aware of the kind of mistakes they're going to make and the sorts of things that you are going to put in the gaps to try and help them not make the mistake. So a final couple of teaching points. So the past participle start can be a one-word clause like terrified. Terrified Noah heard the voice of God. Or it can be a longer subordinate clause, either with the preposition or with the was taken out. The difficulty is caused because normally subject becomes before verb. Noah built an ark. What we're doing in the past participle starter is we're putting the verb first, but it only works in certain circumstances. Adam was tempted to eat the apple, becomes tempted, Adam ate the apple. And that's everything you need to know. But be aware, children will make mistakes. It is messy. But if you've thought this through and you've practiced and you've got a couple of examples to show them about what doesn't work, all will eventually, with enough practice, be well. Good luck.